Due to unforeseen airsoft gun failures recently, the Bolt BRSS AKS74U has become my sort of de facto main gun. And even before then, this gun has had an awful lot of use compared to a lot of other airsoft guns in my collection. And for a while now, I've wanted to do a sort of ultimate review of this AK, which will hopefully give you a good understanding of what it's like to live with this thing. Now, first of all, I need to make it quite plain, this is not a gun for the airsoft beginner. Bolt recoil guns are notorious for being a bit finicky and often requiring high amounts of maintenance, at least compared to a typical AEG. And if you're not willing to learn how to work on one of these things, you're going to have to be willing to pay for someone else to work on it for you. Now, it's certainly a lot more plug and play than a gas blowback rifle, as we'll get into, but I really wouldn't recommend a Bolt BRSS airsoft gun for those who aren't prepared for a relatively high maintenance airsoft build. And whilst it's certainly been a lot more reliable than a lot of my other airsoft guns, I also wouldn't completely rely on it as a backup gun either. Mechanically, it's a very simple gun. There's not much difference between this and a normal airsoft AK AEG. But I didn't pay nearly 500 quid and wait the best part of 8 weeks for a normal AEG. The steel bolt carrier on this AK reciprocates whenever you fire it. That gives it the simulated recoil which the Bolt BRSS family is well known for. And whilst this really adds to the immersion and it's great fun to use, it also helps dismantle the AK even if you're not aware of it. I mean, you can see right here on the top that the hinge pin for the upper receiver, yeah, that's long gone. I lost that within the first few hours of use, and I'm absolutely sick to death of tightening up the gas block. I've done that up so many times. There's only one pin left now. I just don't know what to do with that. Every time you could impact gun it up and it would still come loose. I also recommend that you epoxy the metal end caps onto the woodwork for the top handguard, otherwise they'll rattle loose as well. But that's just annoying, that. And now you can see why I say that this gun can be a bit of a high maintenance build. So obviously you want to keep everything nice and tight, otherwise it'll literally fall apart in your hands when you're firing it. But in my mind, I can deal with all of that because that's all offset by the simulated recoil of the Bolt BRSS system. I can't even begin to describe to you how much fun this thing is to use. You could miss every single target all day long, but you will still enjoy the clattering sensation, it jumping around in your hands. It's bloody phenomenal. And I would argue, bit of a hot take here, that it kicks harder than a lot of gas rifles I've had the chance of trying, or at least rivals them, whilst also being immune or at least more resistant to certain climates and factors which can affect gas guns. Because this is an electric gun, there is no cooldown. You can fire it on full auto all day long. You won't have to worry about shots rolling out the end of the barrel because there's not enough gas pressure. You won't have to worry about the condensation icing up on the insides of the gun when it's firing. You don't have to worry about light striking or changing to a different gas depending on what the climate is. You can use it in the pissing rain, the freezing cold, the strongest of winds, stinking hot, humid, damp, dingy, dry as a bone, doesn't matter, it will work. And the other benefit of this over a gas gun, some Cyma Bakelite 74 style mags, bit of filing and sanding, they work fine. And the best thing about these mags is these are like 15-20 quid each. Try and get a gas mag for 3 times that amount and you probably will struggle. And because of the lack of cooldown, as we mentioned before, you can fire this thing all day long with consistent power. In fact, right now with a Garda M100 spring inside, it's doing bang on the 350 FPS full auto limit. Now crucially, I've only ever powered this on the field with an 11.1 volt LiPo. If you try and use any lower voltage, you run a risk of locking the thing up. These bolts draw an awful lot of power, massive amount of current draw, and they also require quite a bit of voltage for them to work reliably. And to give the battery a helping hand, and also to give some mercy to the poor trigger contacts, I've also installed a Perron micro MOSFET right here. And I strongly recommend you have at least a basic trigger MOSFET because I have actually had to change the contacts or at least clean them out and reshape them because they got absolutely caked in carbon. And the main reason is it draws an awful lot of power, a lot of current, a high voltage on an 11.1 volt battery. You're going to get more of an arc on the trigger contacts. Combined with a high torque motor, you are going to arc and pitch those contacts very quickly. Now, it probably wasn't the best idea to put this MOSFET, as tiny as it is, into the already quite paltry battery compartment in the front right here. There's just an absolute pitiful amount of space in that battery compartment. You're not going to get and the level 1 Volt with a decent capacity to fit in that. And whilst we're looking at the electrics, I also would strongly recommend you fit a fuse. I've got a 30 amp micro automotive fuse in it. Bolts are finicky enough, you don't need a potential fire hazard, so I really strongly recommend you have a fuse. Now, the quality control of bolts is not exactly what I would expect given how much you pay for them. Out of the box, the gearboxes usually sound like they're ingesting a bag of nails. The hop units out of the box also may be a little bit dicky, and the amount of thread locker can be a bit inconsistent. Sometimes they put just the right amount on a bolt, sometimes they absolutely drown a bloody grub screw in it, so you basically have to dig the grub screw out or drill it out, as I've basically had to do with every single freaking grub screw on this gun. So what I also recommend is that you have a pack of stainless steel grub screws and a tap and die set, so that way you can remove and retap and replace any grub screws which give you problems with some nice stainless steel ones, because the ones in this thing, they seem to have the tensile strength of Stilton cheese. People have been asking me about the grub screw sets. You can find them on Amazon, eBay, just a generic set of metric stainless steel grub screws. And when it comes to the barrel and hop unit, these things come with a 6.00mm tight bore barrel out of the box. And these tight bores seem to work very bloody well in my experience. And this gun right here has to be one of the best performing guns I've used in a long time. Hop unit out of the box, yeah, it was a bit crap. They put a really wide, hard rubber blue or purpley nub in it, and it was really firm, and it caused a lot of overhop. I did get it set right at one point, and whilst it had quite a pronounced bounce, it had an awful lot of range. I'm not joking you. This thing was like a friggin' DMR. But recently I took out the stock bucking and chucked in a G&G green bucking, which is my go-to sort of drop-in bucking for an AEG. Nice and quick to throw in, nothing fancy needs to be done to it, and it works very well. Nice and grippy, perfect for the UK temperatures as well. And whilst the range is slightly less than what it was with the original bucking because there's no overhop, the lack of that overhop then also means this thing's a lot more accurate. And even with the slight loss in range, I find that this thing easily competes with basically anything else in its category. This thing shoots a very long way, very accurately, I can tell you that, even when you consider that this has got a very short barrel, and technically the 74U I think classes as a PDW. And when I combine that with a decent sight as well, like this Faiachi RS25 red dot, I find that it doesn't take many shots to take someone out of the game.
Oh bloody hell.
The gearbox in this thing is basically a version 3 gearbox with a very uprated piston assembly, and everything inside this gun is stock aside from the gear set, the anti-reversal latch and the motor pinion. Now the gears in these normally are 26:1 approximately, and for some reason they threw some teeth. They lost a few teeth. Oh no! And whilst it was still working, it didn't sound that good, and you don't really want to run a gun that keeps losing teeth, because otherwise it's going to lose one too many and it will chew up the rest of it, and no, just don't do it. And first of all, when I went to replace them, I tried using a set of SHS 32:1 high torques. However, the sector gear from that set would not engage with the piston correctly. So I then got a set of ZCI helicals, which were 100:300 ratio, which is roughly equivalent to a straight cut ratio of about 26:1, which is roughly what the stock gears are. I also changed the anti-reversal latch because the original Bolt one better engaged with the Bolt gear set, with the Bolt bevel gear, than it did with the new ZCI set. And the one in it now is just a ZCI version 2, version 3 cutoff lever. It works perfectly fine, nothing fancy. And then I also changed the motor pinion to an outdoor and tactical motor pinion, again because it engaged better with the ZCI bevel compared to the original stock pinion on the motor. So most of the bits in the gearbox appear to be your typical version 3 components. I just really recommend that you don't use any other type of piston other than Bolt pistons, because they're very heavily built, they're made out of metal, they've got to handle the recoil weight hooking on the back of it. If you put any other piston in these things with the recoil weight still on, you are probably going to ruin that piston very quickly. Annoyingly, the stock spring guide is plastic, which I think is a bit of a piss take given the cost of the gun. I think even a metal one without bearings would have been nice, because it's a pain in the arse to open this thing up. Even though it's a nice simple version 3 to work on and it comes apart somewhat similar to most AKs, it's so heavily thread locked together, it's an absolute nightmare to take apart. And when I first first got it as well, it was firing at like 400 FPS, so I had to change the mainspring too. Guard at M100 spring in it currently, and they seem to work really well, perfectly consistent, bang on the 350 FPS full auto limit. And performance-wise, this thing has been incredible. Even recently, when the hop unit seems to have been dicking about a bit, probably because it's just rattled loose and all that, I found that this thing has ample range in most gunfights. And with this Feiachi RS25 red dot sight mounted on top, and zeroed roughly where it needs to be, I can unleash very accurate fire against a target out to a very surprising range. Right, I've got them now!
No, nice one, Joe.
And because of the accuracy, I've noticed that I really don't use that much ammunition, even when I'm playing a little more aggressively than usual.
You dead? Yeah. Good. Hope it stays that way.
I think you're the one that shot me down there.
And the simulated recoil really adds to the experience. You have to sort of compensate for it, even though it's not true recoil. The fact that the barrel wiggles around like that as you're firing it, you know, you've got to compensate for that, especially on full auto out to longer ranges. It definitely kicks a lot harder than a TM recoil shock, hands down. However, unlike a TM recoil shock or a gas blowback rifle, there is no bolt catch or lock on empty. But the upside to that is you do not have to use proprietary magazines, as we mentioned earlier. Now, recently I have discovered a bit of a problem on the field when using this thing, and that is, it's just so frigging loud. Now, I enjoy a cheeky little long distance flank and a trip behind enemy lines occasionally. The recoil assembly, when it slams forward, makes a loud metallic clunk, and if you're sneaking around trying to be covert, as soon as you fire that thing, people know exactly where you are immediately. And if you're like me at my local site where I haven't seen anyone else using anything like this, people know exactly who it is too, and they know all your tactics, and it becomes a bit more difficult from then on. It's great, but I have started to notice the noise of this gun giving me away. Not even talking about like HPA guns here, even compared to normal AEGs, this thing is very, very bloody loud and very distinctive with its report. But the biggest, most alarming problem I've had with the Bolt BRSS AKS74U here, it has ruined every single other airsoft gun in my collection. It really has. If you've used one of these and you go over to using something without a recoil system, it's not as fun. It's just not the same. And I've really been struggling recently to put the damn thing down. It's so much fun to use. If you found this review helpful, then make sure you leave a like. If you have any further questions, please make sure to leave them down in the comments. I think I've covered absolutely everything I've done to this gun and my experiences using it. But if you have any other queries, don't hesitate to ask. And if you want to be part of the channel, then please make sure you subscribe too. And speaking of my now ruined airsoft collection, you can check that out right here.